So today's podcast is January 6th, and the morning rinse is Acts 16 through 18. So we're working through the book of Acts, and it has been amazing to read how the disciples are growing in their faith and Paul coming onto the scene, and just miracles are happening and really some neat and exciting things. So pause this and go read Acts 16 through 18 or listen to it on the YouVersion app. So the featured verse of today's morning rinse comes from Acts 16, 25 through 26. But about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns of praise to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. And suddenly there came a great earthquake, so that the foundations of the prison house were shaken, and immediately all the doors were opened and everyone's chains were unfastened. I titled today's podcast, All They Did Was Praise. Why can't it be so difficult to praise amidst our trials? I think that we all experience this when we go through something really challenging. It feels like the last thing that we do is praise. And it's probably because we forget the power of praise. Thus, we default to complaining or calling our friends and venting. We default to those instead of making a habit to praise. One of the things that we have to do is remember that our response to life's challenges, get this, it's not only going to free us, but could also free others as well. So our response of praise, meaning now if we're responding in other ways, obviously it could put us into shackles and could put other people as well into shackles if they look up to us or if we respond in a way that is not healthy. It could really damage those people. However, if we respond in praise, that will free us as well as freeing others. So here's our honesty right now. Let's be honest. Paul and Silas were not having the best day in this situation. I mean, they had called out this lady who was demon possessed, and yet her possession was providing income to some people because that's how they, people were coming to pay this lady to tell them, kind of like a median sort of thing. And when Paul and Silas cast out that demon, she could no longer work. And so therefore her bosses were very upset. They took Paul and Silas to the leaders. They ended up mobbing him. This crowd ended up mobbing them. Their clothes were ripped from their backs. They were beaten, and then they were thrown into prison. For doing God's work, they were thrown into prison. The other thing, too, is that they were not just put into an entry-level jail cell. They were actually put into the inner prison. If you look at verse 24 of Acts 16, this was probably very similar to like our modern-day maximum security cells that was reserved for literally the most dangerous prisoners. Not only that, but their feet were shackled into stocks, which these were basically two boards that were attached together with these iron clamps. Not only that, but the guards would use these stocks to secure a prisoner by putting their ankles through the clamps and keeping them there. So not only was this super uncomfortable, but I am pretty sure that there were some extreme amounts of pain that they were enduring, not just from these shackles, but also too from being beaten. And they didn't have their clothes. So can you imagine this whole scenario, this scene? All they could do was sit in their shackles. They were just sitting there in this inner prison with the shackles on, unclothed, and all they could do was use their voices because they were completely chained down. And so that is exactly what they used. But instead of the default of complaining or blaming, these bosses and blaming the mob and getting really irritated at the Jews who were mad, and defending themselves to the other prisoners about their predicament. I can only imagine when people get into a new prison, one of the biggest questions that people ask is, well, what are you in here for? But instead of them complaining, they use their voice for an opposite direction. And this subject matter will come up a lot in the Psalms when I cover the Psalms. But using our voice for the right reasons is what I believe Acts is partially sharing with us. It's one of the foundations of it, because we're using our voice. It is our greatest instrument. We use our voice for God's purpose. And that is what they did. Instead of complaining, they began to pray and sing hymns of praise. They were praising God for probably multiple things. And guess who heard them? All the other prisoners. These maximum security prisoners who had done atrocious things, all the other prisoners heard them praise. Miraculously, while Paul and Silas were praising, not only did their individual chains come off, but all of the prisoners' chains were unfastened. And then the prison doors opened up miraculously. These prisoners had the hardest of hearts. They had committed the greatest of crimes. Their pain was probably so deep. We know people that act in certain ways because of pain from childhood or pain from what other people have done to them, or the things that they have learned. Sometimes sin is learned because we get, shown it through other people. All these people heard him. And that is when God wanted to make himself real to them. All Paul and Silas did was praise. Our praise unshackles. This type of response to life's challenges and challenging situations, it will bring freedom. And not just freedom for ourselves, but to others as well. And all they did was praise. Just like Paul would get led to wherever he needed to be. We read throughout the morning rinse that the Holy Spirit led him to certain places. And then even he was on his way to a certain place, and the Holy Spirit moved him to a different place and said, don't go to that place. That is where they got led to in this story. It was right where they needed to be. Those people needed to hear his praise. So I'm encouraging you to listen. Even if you become persecuted, or even if you've got friends who are going to mock you or challenge your thought process or challenge your praise, because praise oftentimes will come from pain. And Paul and Silas were sitting in pain. They had been beaten. They were in shackles. They had been accused. Literally by doing God's work. And they were hurting physically, and probably their heart hurt as well, which is why it's so important to praise, because when we praise, we become free. And you never know what pain God is leading you to that is going to ultimately then lead you to praise, freeing other people around you. So do not take your pain lightly. Sometimes we are led to pain so that we can praise. Today's challenge to dig deeper is to ask this question of yourself. Are you going through a life challenge right now where your circumstances might make it really, really easy to complain? Are you going through those life challenges that make it really easy to protest? Well, I'm challenging you to turn those protests into praise. Try it. You are going to not only feel the chains of despair coming off of you, but you never know who needs their chains unshackled because you praised in the spirit realm. And they might not necessarily always hear you praising, but there's something that happens in the spirit realm when you praise. Even if you're in your home by yourself, turn worship music on, turn that praise on, walk through your house thanking God for the challenges that come along your way, just like Paul and Silas did. All they did was praise and sing hymns. And look at what happened. Tonight, when you are reflecting on this challenge for the day, I want you to write down an example of when you turned a protest that you were about ready to speak, when you turned that protest into praise. Write it down.